Hello everyone, tonight we're stepping back into a forgotten chapter of American history. A chapter written not with the glamour of silver screen cowboys or daring train robberies, but with dust, sweat, struggle, and silence. Tonight, you'll drift into sleep with a gentle unravelling of why the Wild West was far more dangerous than the movies ever let on. This isn't the story of tall hats and quick draws. It's the real story of lawlessness, disease, endless travel, and a quiet kind of resilience. Before we begin, I'd love to know, where are you listening from and what time is it as you press play? Leave a comment below. It warms my heart to see how many corners of the world we connect from. If you enjoy these historical journeys in the quiet of night, consider liking this video and subscribing. It helps more weary travellers like yourself find their way to these calm shores of the past. Now, nestle in. Let your limbs grow heavy and your mind soften like candlelight in a darkened cabin. Breathe deeply. You're about to ride west, but not on a horse. You're riding in thought, in the rhythm of memory, and in the warm comfort of your bed. You're in motion. The wheels beneath you creak and shudder on uneven terrain. The rickety wagon sways gently, like a cradle built of timber and cloth. You feel the jostle in your spine, but your mind is distant, half lost in the dry horizon before you. It is 1854, and you've left everything behind. The towns and railroads of the East are a memory now, blurred in your mind like morning fog. You've traded stone streets for dry plains, factories for foothills, and certainty for the unknown. Your journey westward began in the bustling rail depots of Illinois, where eager families clutched ticket stubs and whispered prayers. Your own family was among them, wide-eyed and sun-flushed, bound for a new life. The government had promised land, plots for the taking. They said the West was a place of bounty, of independence, a place where a man could carve his name into the earth itself. What they didn't say, not in the newspapers or the handbills or the hurried speeches from land agents, was that the land fought back. You feel it already. The air grows thinner with each mile. The wind speaks in dry tongues, whipping your bonnet, stealing your breath. Nights are cold, not cold like winter, but a brittle, empty cold, like sleeping in the ribs of a long-dead animal. You clutch your shawl tighter each evening, and wake each morning to the brittle sound of frost cracking on canvas. The other wagons in your company creak ahead and behind you. You see them, always, dim shapes in the dust. Some carry children, coughing weakly into cloths. Others carry pregnant women who groan softly as the road jostles their swollen bodies. A few wagons lag behind, always lagging. One axle cracked, one wheel warped. It doesn't take much to fall behind out here, and once you fall behind, it is very hard to catch up, but you keep moving. Each day blends into the next, all wind and wheatgrass and brittle bones. You learn to measure time by the sound of insects, the slow shifting of the sun, and the hunger that grows in your belly. Some nights you rest beside muddy rivers, hoping to refill water barrels. Some nights you sleep beneath half-built shelters, propped up against dried buffalo dung and driftwood. Every mile west is a mile further from safety, but you keep going, because everyone else does, because to turn back is unthinkable. And so, you sit in the swaying wagon, wrapped in a coat that smells faintly of cedar and smoke, and you listen. The sounds are endless. The dull clop of ox hooves, the occasional crack of a whip, the soft mumbling of a child who no longer bothers to cry. At night, coyotes cry into the stillness, their howls travelling for miles over the endless plain. You sleep lightly, one ear open. You dream of beds, of soup, of music. But mostly, you just dream of quiet. And through all of it, the hunger, the dust, the aching, something else settles in. Fear. Not fear like thunder, not loud and immediate. It's softer. It's the fear of knowing that if you break a bone out here, it may be the end. That if you get sick, there is no doctor, no medicine, just whiskey and hope. That if someone attacks the camp in the night, there may not be anyone left to tell the tale. Because out here, in the wild nothingness between one map edge and the next, there is no law, no sheriff, no cavalry. Only you, the wind, and the dust. And so you press on. Tomorrow you'll reach the Kansas territory, or perhaps the day after. The roads blur, but you know it's there, somewhere in the heat shimmer. It's a land wrapped in promise and violence, in broken treaties and burning fields. You've heard whispers in the caravan, of settlers clashing with native tribes, of raids, of entire towns burned before they were built. Some wagons carry muskets now. Some men ride with pistols slung low on their hips, but even the most well-armed among them ride with glances over their shoulders. Because the West, you're learning, is not about heroism. It's about surviving, and not everyone does. But for now, you're still here, wrapped in the scent of dust and wood smoke, ears half full of wagon wheels and prairie wind. You curl tighter in your coat, and the rhythm of the wheels becomes lullaby. You'll sleep tonight, lightly perhaps, but sleep still, and tomorrow you ride again. The sky greets you in dull bronze this morning, not a sunrise of colour but of haze, smoke perhaps, or just dust caught in the morning light. You've learned not to ask any more. Not every question on the frontier has an answer. You've reached the Kansas territory, though no sign marks it, just a shift in the air. The grass seems harsher here, taller yet brittle. The soil, when it clings to your boots, is dry and reddish. Your guide, a man with a crooked spine and eyes like river stones, tells you softly that this land is bloody. You don't yet know what that means, but soon you will. You pass through an empty hamlet around midday. 5 buildings, long abandoned, lean like drunkards in the wind. Their boards are sun-bleached and split. A rocking chair remains on one porch, moving slightly, though there's no breeze. It's not old, not by your standards. Maybe built 3 years ago, maybe less, and already the prairie has begun to reclaim it. No one says a word as your wagon passes through. You're beginning to learn that silence here is wisdom. At camp that night, under a sky pricked with stars, you overhear 2 men speaking in low voices by the fire. One mentions bleeding Kansas. The phrase hangs in the air like ash. There's been killing in these parts, they say, over slavery, over land, over pride. The federal government has sent men, but they have no control this far out. Settlers have taken sides. Some call themselves jayhawkers, others border ruffians, but both carry rifles, both have killed. You look around the campfire, at the women spooning beans into the mouths of sleepy children, at the weary hands folding shirts, mending trousers, whispering bedtime hymns, and wonder how many here have already chosen a side, or whether some are only pretending to be neutral. Even this deep into the West, politics bleed into the soil. Lawlessness here isn't loud. It isn't gangs on horseback robbing trains. Not yet. It's quieter, slower. It's justice done with a rope before dawn, with a boot on the neck and no trial. If a man cheats you in a deal or steps on your pride, there may be no court to settle the matter, only a bullet. And in the distance, always, the knowledge that the law won't come riding in after the fact. The law is miles away, states away, and it might not even care. That night, a woman in your wagon train disappears. Her name was Martha. You'd spoken to her only once, briefly. She had a soft voice and smelled of rosewater, even out here. She and her husband were travelling west alone. When the sun rises, he is alone. He says nothing about it, packs their things, sits silently at breakfast. No one asks questions, not even the guide. You learn something about this world in that moment. People vanish out here, whether it's disease, despair, or something darker. The land swallows them, and others learn to look away. You ride again. Your hands are blistered now, your lips cracked. You've begun to ration your words, speaking only when needed. Not out of weariness, but conservation. Language feels too precious here. At the river crossing, 2 children are swept away. You didn't see it happen, only heard the screams, then the quiet. And after the quiet, the silence again. Always the silence. The current claimed them before anyone could reach them. Their wagon stood still for an hour while their parents knelt in the reeds, and then they moved on. You wanted to cry, but something inside you, something strange and hard and new, told you to keep your tears. They won't bring the river back. They won't slow the wheels, and you'll need them soon, because Kansas is only the middle. The hardest part is still to come. By now you've begun to feel it in your bones. This place is not made for comfort. It's made for endurance. It is not a land of cowboys and saloons. Not yet. It is a land of long silences, of wary glances, of dirt under your nails and grief you don't have the time to name. You sleep that night under the open sky. No tents left standing after the windstorm. You hear insects clicking in the grass, wolves howling somewhere distant, the breathing of the man next to you, slow and steady. You lie there, hands folded on your chest, eyes staring upward into the dark velvet sky. And you think, maybe this is all the frontier ever was. Not heroism, not romance, just endurance. By the time your wagon limps into the edge of the settlement, your oxen are near collapse and your provisions nearly gone. The wheels have groaned for 2 weeks now, under the weight of not just supplies but silence. The kind of silence that thickens after each loss, each burial, each dry cough that doesn't go away. You don't even notice when the first signs of life appear, a fence post here, a splintered barn roof there, until the smell of wood smoke carries on the air. The town isn't on your map, but then again, neither was the graveyard you passed last week, half-fenced and full of leaning crosses carved from old bed frames. It isn't a proper town, not by Eastern standards. No streets, no stone, just a sprawl of crude buildings slumped low against the wind like they're bracing to be forgotten. A saloon, its sign hanging sideways. A smithy with its doors open to reveal a single hammer, but no blacksmith. 2 homes, a shack that may have once been a jail but now holds only broken crates and rusted chain. There are people here, scattered, silent, watching. They don't wave. You've long stopped expecting them to. A man with a brown coat and one arm gestures you forward. He doesn't ask your name, just looks at your wagon, your hands, your face, and tells you to park near the well if you plan to rest. He doesn't offer water. You find it yourself. The others from your train fan out quickly, drifting toward whatever shelter or supplies they can find. Some don't plan to stay more than a night. You overhear them, heading further west to Colorado Territory or Oregon. But you can tell already by the set of their shoulders that some of them won't make it that far. Some of them know it too. You can always tell by the eyes. When people know they're nearing the edge, their eyes grow still. Not afraid, just resigned. This town wasn't built by planners or merchants. It was built out of desperation. You learn this in pieces. An older man at the well says it started as a cattle stop, then a mining outpost, then nothing. Then people fleeing Kansas fighting ended up here, then farmers whose crops failed, then widows, then fugitives. They all stayed because they had nowhere else. They called it something once. The man can't remember what, but everyone just calls it the bottom now, because it's as far down as most of them are willing to fall. The saloon is the only real business that functions. Inside it smells of mould, old liquor and wet leather. No piano, no laughter, only a few men hunched over their drinks and a woman in the corner with bruises too old to be recent. The bartender doesn't speak. When you order a drink, he pours it with eyes fixed past you, like he's watching the wall breathe. You stay 3 nights. On the second, a young man is hanged from the cottonwood behind the jail. You didn't hear the crime, no one really did, but someone claimed he stole from a wagon. There was no trial. The rope was already waiting. People gathered not to watch, but because they knew better than to look away. There's a kind of brutal rhythm to the justice here, swift, unforgiving, and always hungry. That night, as you walk back to your wagon, a woman stops you. She's maybe 30, maybe 50. It's hard to tell beneath the dust and deep creases of sun-dried skin. She tells you not to stay longer than you have to, not because it's unsafe, though it is, but because it's easy to forget to leave. People arrive in the bottom thinking it's a stop, and then one thing leads to another. A broken axle, a sick child, a fever, and then years go by and they're still there, sitting in the same chair, staring at the same horizon, waiting for something to change. But nothing ever does. In the dark you understand something else. The frontier doesn't kill only with bullets or knives. Sometimes it kills with the absence of motion, with the slow erosion of purpose. A man or woman can fade here without even realizing it. Not just their body, but the idea of them. Their dreams, their stories, all lost in the wind. On the 3rd morning you pack your wagon before the sun rises. You don't say goodbye. No one does here. The bottom disappears behind you by midday. When you look back you can barely make out the roofs above the dry grass, as if it never existed, as if it was just a fever dream, a temporary hiccup in the endless moving breath of the prairie. You ride on. The road west grows thinner, fewer paths, fewer people. The sky feels larger now, heavier somehow, like it's watching. Somewhere up ahead you're told is a real town. One with buildings that won't fall, with doctors and wells that never dry. But you don't trust that anymore. You've learned to believe only in what you can touch. And even that, only until it breaks. You pass a burned-out wagon 2 days later. No bodies, just the frame, and 2 empty boots lying in the dirt. You don't stop. There's nothing to be done. You press forward, feeling the wheels grind beneath you, and the wind pick up again. You think of the woman in the saloon, of the boy with the rope around his neck, of Martha's empty bedroll, and you keep going. Because there is no turning back. The land begins to change again. The flatness breaks apart into gentle hills, not high enough to be called mountains, but steep enough to slow the wagons. Trees grow sparser here, wind-blown cottonwoods and scraggly junipers, twisted like arthritic fingers. The heat sets in with more force now, not in waves, but as a constant presence, dense and dry and close to the skin. Dust clings to your clothes and the backs of your teeth. Your throat burns when you wake and again when you sleep. The others cough too, quietly but often. No one says it, but you've entered what people here call the fever season. It begins without warning. One of the children wakes shivering in the night. His mother bundles him in quilts and murmurs hymns, but his skin stays hot, his lips begin to crack. The next day, 2 more take ill. A man with yellowed eyes and a woman whose fingernails have turned blue. No one knows the cause. You've heard words whispered: ague, swamp fever, prairie sickness, typhoid, flux. Names don't help much. They only remind you that this is not new. The land has done this before, to others. There are no doctors on the trail, just guesswork and desperation. You boil water if you have the firewood to spare. You mix vinegar and bark tea. You pray. None of it seems to matter. Bodies fail slowly, then quickly, and the pace of the wagon train falters, and you falter with it. There's no room to mourn. The road doesn't wait for grief. Those who die are buried shallowly, their names carved into bits of wagon board, or not at all. A boot tied to a tree branch, a stone cairn beside a creek. These are all that mark a life lost. There's no time to linger. If you delay too long, the heat will spoil your water, your oxen will weaken, and you'll join the ones beneath the dirt. On the 5th day of fever, you begin to feel it yourself. Not a sharp pain, but a dull pressure behind your eyes, like someone pressing their hand against your skull from the inside. Your limbs feel too heavy. You sweat through your clothes, though the wind is cool now. At night, you lie in the wagon bed and watch the stars pulse softly above you. They look farther away than usual. You wonder, idly, whether the sickness is real, or if the land itself just wants you gone. The guide tells you to keep moving. Always that. Keep the wheels turning. Fever or not, the trail doesn't stop. It never stops. And there's something about his voice that tells you he's seen more of this than he'll say. Maybe he's survived it. Maybe he hasn't. Each day blurs. A woman gives birth one morning beside a dried-up creek. The child does not cry. No one speaks. A man falls from his horse and never wakes. They bury him at a bend in the trail. His boots are taken before the dirt is even packed down. Not out of disrespect, but need. Nothing is wasted anymore. Even grief is rationed here. One night you dream of your old home in the east, a proper roof, a clock ticking in the hallway, bread baking in a clean oven. In the dream, you open a cupboard and it's full of water. Cool, clear, still water. You wake choking on your own breath, drenched in sweat, the canvas above you flapping like a shroud. The next morning the fever breaks, for you at least. Your strength returns slowly, like a trickle of water through dry cloth. But others are not so lucky. The boy with the cracked lips doesn't wake. His mother rides in silence all day, her hands wrapped tightly around a folded shawl in her lap. She holds it like it's still warm. No one tells her to let go. You learn later that cholera and dysentery are the most common killers here. Not gunfights, not snakebite, not the raids people whisper about at night. It's the water, or the food, or the heat, or maybe just bad luck. Death here is not cinematic. It does not come with music or monologue. It comes quietly. Unwashed hands, rotten meat, a stomach cramp that doesn't go away, a shallow breath, and then stillness. And so the train moves on, lighter now. The sick left behind or buried. Fewer voices at camp, fewer plates by the fire. The children who remain play more quietly. Even their laughter seems smaller, as if they've learned that the prairie punishes joy that grows too loud. The land keeps opening wider. At the edge of a bluff one evening you see it. The vastness of it all. Miles and miles of scrub and dry earth and mountains so faint they look like smoke. You wonder how far it goes. Whether it ever ends. Whether people were meant to come here at all. You feel a strange pull in your chest. Something between awe and fear. the way you might feel staring into the mouth of a cave too deep to see the bottom. Someone next to you mutters, "This land doesn't want us." No one disagrees. That night the coyotes howl again, but it's not them that keep you awake. It's the silence between their cries, the vast cold silence that stretches from one call to the next. The silence that sounds a lot like forever, and still you move forward, because that's what people do out here. They move, or they die. The land around you is no longer quiet. It breathes now, not with peace, but with tension. You've left behind the fever trails and shallow graves of the last crossing, but what lies ahead offers no safety, only uncertainty. Word travels faster than you'd expect out here, through campfires and trading posts, whispered over tin cups and shared tobacco. There's talk of skirmishes, not the political kind, but bloody close ones, between settlers and tribes, between homesteaders and raiders, between men who wear uniforms and men who don't. They say you're heading into contested ground now. To the mapmakers back east, it's a no-man's land, somewhere between Kansas and Colorado, where territory lines blur and disappear. But the people who live here have never needed maps. The Cheyenne, Arapaho, Kiowa, Comanche, they've known this land since long before the first white wagons cut across its skin. To them, this isn't new ground. It's sacred, ancestral, necessary. The buffalo still pass through here in dwindling numbers, and wherever the buffalo go, conflict follows. You feel it almost immediately. The trail shifts again, not in shape, but in energy. The air is sharper somehow, more alert. Riders appear on ridges now and again, not yours. They don't approach, just sit their horses watching. You can't tell if they're scouts, hunters, or something more. No one speaks of them aloud. The guide starts lighting fewer campfires at night. He keeps watch longer, even when he limps with fatigue. The oxen are kept closer to camp. The rifles stay loaded. You hear stories at a way station built from sod and cracked wood, a single room shelter with a blackened stove and bullet holes in the doorframe. A man there, wrapped in a patched cavalry coat, tells you what happened to the wagon train ahead of you. Ambushed near the Smoky Hill River, a dozen dead, 2 wagons burned, the rest turned back. He doesn't say who attacked, doesn't have to. The silence after his story says more than any name could. You keep moving forward, your wagon one of fewer now. Some have left the train altogether, choosing to settle early or turn back to Kansas. Others are missing, gone in the night. You don't ask questions anymore, you just count the wheels that still turn and the faces still present at dawn. The land is flatter again. Vast stretches of sun-bleached grass broken by occasional red rock outcroppings and dry creek beds. The sun is unforgiving. There are days you taste metal in your mouth from the heat. Your skin never stops stinging. You pass the bones of animals picked clean. Buzzards watch you. Sometimes you think they know something you don't. Then one morning you see the first burned homestead. It's hard to say what it was. The frame is collapsed, scorched black and sagging into the dust. A single iron stove still stands upright, its door hanging open like a silent scream. The fence is torn down. The barn is gone entirely. No livestock, no wagon, no sign of anyone. But you find a doll's arm beneath a wheel hub. Porcelain chipped, fingers curled. Someone lived here. Someone probably died here. A younger man in your group, barely grown, face still soft, stares at the wreckage too long. That night he asks the guide if what they say is true. About raids, about scalps, about what happens to families who settle where they're not wanted. The guide doesn't answer directly, just spits into the fire and says, "They don't want us here, and we never asked if we were welcome." You dream that night of fire. Not hellfire, but man-made. Dry grass lit by torches, smoke choking the air, horses thundering through the dark. You wake with your heart pounding. The wind whistles outside the wagon flap, high and lonely. There's no attack. But the fear lingers. The next day, your train meets a small group headed east. Ragged, sunburnt, eyes hollow. They carry almost nothing. They lost their wagon, they say, shot out from under them in the night. They've been walking for 3 days. One of them has an arrow wound in the thigh, wrapped in blood-soaked linen. Another has a baby in her arms that doesn't move. No one speaks of it. They rest in your camp that night, and in the morning they keep walking. No wagon will take them. No one has the space. You realise something else then. It's not just the land that's dangerous out here, it's the idea that anyone owns it, that anyone deserves it more than anyone else. that this vast, untamed stretch of earth can be cut and divided and claimed without consequence. That illusion has already cost lives. It will cost more. Between two wars, one just passed in Kansas, and one still growing in the western hills, you are nothing but a speck moving through contested silence. And yet you move. You don't know why anymore. Habit, maybe, or the memory of a place you were told existed, a place of orchards and rivers and peace. You no longer believe in it, but your body still follows the path. Your hands still steer the reins. One evening you pass a group of native riders in the distance. They do not stop you, do not shout. They only watch. You do not wave, you do not run, you just keep going. And the land, as always, remains silent. It's the hills that change you first. They rise slowly in the west like a great exhale from the land, stretching against the burning sky. The road grows thinner here, more rock than dirt, the wheels grinding over loose gravel and dry stream beds. You begin to see old signs, not words, but what they mean. A broken pickaxe near a collapsed tent, pans left rusting beside a creek that hasn't held water in years, a rotted leather boot with no foot inside it. These are the footprints of those who came before, who chased the same promise whispered in the newspapers and saloons. Gold. It's 1859 now, or near enough. You've lost count. Somewhere north of you, in the Colorado Territory, men are digging into the Rockies with torn hands and hollow eyes. They've come from every coast, every river town, every city back east, driven by the same lie wrapped in hope, that somewhere beneath these jagged rocks lies salvation. They call it Pike's Peak country, even though most never reach the peak. They don't care. They're not after mountains. They're after veins, the gold kind. You pass one of the camps after a week's hard travel. Not a town, not really, just a scar on the hillside. The smell hits first. Sweat, whiskey, burnt meat, and something underneath it all that turns your stomach. The men here are filthy, feral and desperate. Most are shirtless in the heat, their backs streaked with sunburn and red dust, their eyes too bright from lack of sleep. There are no women, no children, just pickaxes, pans, and the dull rhythm of digging. The camp is loud, chaotic, and somehow lifeless. No music, no joy, just movement without purpose. You stay only one night, trading a spool of thread and some dried beans for a tin cup of bitter coffee and a saddle repair. You sleep under your wagon with your hand on the stock of your rifle. You're not sure who to fear more now, the land or the men trying to survive it. One of the miners sits by your fire for a time. He looks older than he probably is. Skin-leathered, beard full of dirt, a thin gold chain around his neck that probably cost him everything. He tells you there's no gold here. Not really, just dust. Maybe a nugget now and then, but never enough. He says the big companies are the ones who'll get rich, the ones with machines and steam drills and lawyers, not men like him. He says he's seen murder over a few flakes of pyrite. He doesn't seem angry, just tired. You ask him why he stays. He shrugs, says going back would be admitting the lie. The next morning, as you pack the wagon again, you watch a fight break out near one of the tents. Two men, one with a shovel, one with a knife. Over what? You don't know. No one stops them. No one even turns their head. When it's over, one limps away, the other doesn't move. A dog licks the blood from the rocks. You hitch your oxen and leave without looking back. The road climbs from there. The air grows thinner, colder. The green disappears again, replaced by brown scrub and pale dust. You pass more signs. Abandoned tools, stripped mules, rock piles stacked with nothing beneath them. The dream of gold is decaying in real time, and no one seems to notice. It clings to the hills like mist, filling the mouths of travellers who still believe. They come walking from the east, their eyes bright with hope. You recognise them. You were one of them once. At the top of a long ridge you find a crude sign hammered into a pine stake. Last Chance Gulch, it reads in crooked letters. Someone carved a skull beneath it. You don't stop to wonder if it's meant to be a joke. You've lost your taste for humour. There's another camp here, smaller, quieter. A few tents, a lean-to with a cook fire, some rifles stacked like logs. But no one comes to greet you. No one looks up. You realise they're all digging. Not with pickaxes, but with shovels. A shallow trench, a wrapped body. You count 3 graves already filled. This isn't a gold camp anymore. It's a burial ground. That night, the wind howls through the rocks, long and low, like it's trying to say something in a language older than words. You can't sleep. You sit up beneath the canvas, staring out into the black shapes of the hills. You think of all the men still marching west with gold in their dreams. You wonder how many of them will leave behind bones in places like this, unnamed and unremembered. You pass another miner 2 days later, alone, shoes worn through, hat shredded, a bag slung over one shoulder that clinks with something inside. He doesn't look at you, doesn't speak, just walks past into the sun toward the hills. You don't turn to watch where he goes. You already know. What they never said in the pamphlets and what the newspapers forgot to print is that gold is heavier than it looks. It weighs down the soul, buries whole lives, not in vaults, but in the ground. And so you keep going, leaving the mountains behind, your wagon rattling with every step. Your hands are darker now, your face lined. The land has taken more than it's given. But still, the wheels turn. You haven't seen a river in days. The sky stretches so wide above you it feels like it might fold down and press you flat. The West isn't done with you yet. It never is. You lose the trail for half a day. It happens just past a dry arroyo where the wind scours the ground bare, sweeping away all signs of passage. The wheel ruts you've been following disappear, and the markers, twisted branches, stones stacked by earlier travellers, are gone. You backtrack twice before realising there is no clear path anymore, only open land. The prairie is indifferent now. It does not guide, it does not warn. It simply watches, silent and still. The guide says nothing, but you can see it in his shoulders, the weight of the decision, the calculation behind his quiet. He picks a direction by the sun and rides ahead alone. The rest of you follow without a word, your oxen stumbling over hardpan and broken sage. The heat bears down without mercy. The grass is yellowed and brittle, rustling like dry parchment under your boots. At midday the wind shifts and the smell hits. Ash. It grows stronger as you crest a low rise, and then you see it. Miles ahead the earth has turned black, not from shadow, not from water, but fire. A grass burn, deliberate and wide, nothing left but char and stubble. The ground still smoulders in places, curling thin lines of smoke into the sky. You pause the wagon and step down, boots crunching into the soft, scorched remains. There's no life here. No birds, no rabbits, not even insects. The fire has swept it all clean. The guide says it's a hunting fire, started by riders who know the land, who push game toward traps and waiting spears. Others say it's a message, a warning to those who pass through without asking. You cross the black earth slowly. The heat rises through the soles of your boots. Every breath tastes of soot. By the third day the food is nearly gone. Your salted meat ran out 2 weeks ago. The cornmeal moulded in the last storm. What remains is hardtack and bitter coffee, and a few scraps of dried apple that taste like leather. You boil water over twig fires, filter it through cloth, add a pinch of ash to settle the silt. Still, your stomach cramps nightly. You've stopped speaking during meals. There's no point. Hunger dulls everything. One man suggests hunting, but there's nothing left to hunt. The fire saw to that. Another speaks of trading with nearby tribes. The guide says that's not wise. Not now, not here. Trust is too thin. Tension's too high. Everyone's hungry. Everyone's armed. So you ration. You chew slowly. You sleep more to keep the hunger quiet. And then, one evening, you find the buffalo, or what's left of them. 20 carcasses scattered across a wide, cracked valley, half-eaten and crawling with flies. Skins torn. Bones stripped. They weren't hunted for meat. That much is clear. Most of them are rotting in the sun, wasted. Slaughtered for sport or to poison the land. You've heard the stories. Men paid by the government or railroad companies to kill as many as possible, to drive out the tribes who depend on them. You never believed them. You do now. You watch the guide dismount slowly, his hand resting on the head of one fallen beast. The flies rise in a buzzing cloud, disturbed by his presence. He doesn't speak for a long time. When he does, it's in a voice you barely hear. They're starving us both. That night, the youngest in your wagon, a girl, maybe 7, asks why the animals died. No one answers. She asks again. Her mother shushes her softly, and then she whispers something no one forgets. If the buffalo can't live here, how can we? You dream of stampedes, not real ones, but the kind that rumble through your chest in sleep. Hooves in the darkness, dust in the sky, shapes moving at the edge of firelight. When you wake, the sound is still in your ears, but there is no thunder. only wind. You begin to see signs of famine in the camp. A man sharpening his knife with too much focus. A woman licking her fingers long after her bread is gone. A child staring too long at someone else's pack. There are no thefts yet, but the silence has changed. Even the landscape feels thinner now, less certain. You pass a creek that runs dry before your eyes. A snake lying belly up on the rocks. A bird with its wings spread unmoving in the brush. You stop watching the horizon for signs of towns. You know now that towns can be illusions, bones wrapped in canvas, empty wells disguised as hope. You trust only what you can touch, and even then, only briefly. On the fourth morning of the burn stretch, the guide doesn't wake. He's not dead, just silent. His eyes open, but he stares at nothing. His horse stands untied nearby, waiting. You let him rest. Someone else leads the wagons that day. You cross the last of the fire-blacked ground that evening. The grass begins to grow again, thin, trembling green. A single flower, blue and stubborn, peeks through a crack in the earth. You don't know its name, you don't need to. The land is still alive, somehow. But so is the hunger, so is the silence, so is the long, hard road that waits ahead, curving through the hills like a question you've grown too tired to ask. And still, you follow it. Because there's nothing behind you but fire. You come upon the next settlement by accident. It isn't marked on any map, and no one in the camp expected it. It doesn't even look like a settlement at first. Just a scattering of structures, half tents and tar paper roofs, stitched together out of canvas and salvaged wood. They lean into the wind as if afraid to be seen. The only signs of life are smoke from a chimney and two mules tied to a broken fence, ribs sharp under their skin. There's no name on the place, no sign nailed to a post. Just a handful of people moving slowly between their tasks. You recognise the look on their faces right away. Eyes dulled by distance, voices hushed by caution. They carry their guns in plain view. No one pretends here. The man who greets you wears a vest with brass buttons, but no badge. Says he's the constable, though no one calls him that. You notice his holster isn't strapped properly, just tied with leather string around his thigh. He eyes your wagon without expression, then jerks his head toward a dry corral where other travellers have parked. You learn quickly that this place isn't a town. It's a stop, a thin pause in the great emptiness between where you were and where you're headed. People don't live here because they want to. They live here because they got stuck. A broken axle, a missing horse, a bullet wound too shallow to kill but deep enough to keep you still. There's no law here, not really. Only agreements, unspoken ones. The store is a single-room shack where everything is behind a wire cage. You don't see the owner, just a pair of eyes watching you from behind the wood slats. You trade a strip of leather and a pair of copper buttons for a tin of flour with bugs in it, and a jar of fat that might once have been butter. You thank no one. No one thanks you. Later you hear shots, not close, just 2, maybe 3 from the ridge. You wait. No one reacts, no one goes to check. When the guide speaks again, finally after 2 days of silence, he says only, "Sometimes they shoot coyotes, sometimes not." At dusk, 2 men fight behind the stable. You hear fists, something heavy hitting a wall, then a voice rasping something about debt. There's no sheriff to settle it, no court to speak over it. You realise again how far from any authority you truly are. Out here, justice has nothing to do with fairness. It's about proximity, numbers, and who's willing to pull the trigger first. The children are quiet here. Their games are half-hearted, watched over with too many eyes. One boy carries a stick like a rifle. Another girl plays with stones, lining them into graves. You don't ask who she's burying. Your wagon train is smaller now. One family split off 2 days ago, said they'd had enough of waiting. They left early with no farewell. Their wheel tracks veer into a dry draw that leads into hills you haven't named. Someone else suggests you do the same, but there's no agreement. Without the guide, the route feels brittle, and besides, there's no guarantee the next stretch is better. The lawless places stretch between real towns like a frayed rope, too thin to cross safely, but too tempting to let go of. You find yourself staring more often at your rifle, at your water skin, at the bag of flour that grows lighter each day. You start measuring people not by how they talk, but by how they carry themselves when things go wrong. There's an old man in the camp who says he used to be a preacher. You don't believe him, but you sit by his fire anyway. He talks in riddles, says this land was never meant to be tamed, says the mountains aren't waiting to welcome you. They're just too big to care if you die. Says the law is like water here. It flows where it can, but mostly just sinks into the dirt. You watch a trial of sorts the next afternoon. A circle of men and one woman arguing over a stolen knife. The accused doesn't speak. He just stares at the ground while the others shout. In the end, they take his boots and leave him outside camp with a sack of flour and a warning. He limps into the dusk, feet bare. No one follows. Later, you ask if the knife was even his. Someone shrugs. Don't matter. He's gone now. You spend 4 days in the stop. On the 5th, you pack your things before dawn. There's no farewell, no ceremony. The sun rises as you hitch the oxen and roll out across the ridge. You don't look back. You know what's behind you. Hunger, hard eyes, the kind of silence that turns into violence if you breathe too loud. Ahead is more of the same, maybe. Maybe worse. But the trail doesn't ask for certainty. It just asks that you keep moving. And so you do. As you push onward, the trail begins to grind against your skin like coarse sandpaper. The landscape around you has grown flatter again, the distant hills folding into the endless horizon. The wind is hotter now, dragging dry dust across your face, slipping under your clothes, filling your mouth with grit. Each breath feels heavier, as though the air itself is thickening, dense with invisible menace. That night, under a sky littered with stars sharper than you've ever seen, the first sign arrives. A slow, creeping weariness that drapes over the camp like a shadow. It starts with a headache for one of the men, a slight chill for another. You dismiss it at first, chalking it up to exhaustion, the relentless sun, or the dry water. But within days, it spreads, a quiet sickness moving through the wagons like a secret visitor no one wants to name. The guide notices it too. His usual stoic calm cracks at the edges, and he makes fewer jokes by the fire. He cautions the group to drink only boiled water and to wash their hands with alcohol, the small bottles pulled from packs becoming precious as gold. You watch the fever take hold of the people around you, the man with the broken wagon wheel, the woman with the baby, the boy who no longer plays with stones. Their skin glows with a faint, unnatural flush, eyes sunken and glassy. Nights grow restless, moans slipping through the thin canvas of your tent. The sickness isn't kind. It drags its victims down slowly, coughing, filling the air, sweat soaking clothes, shaking that feels too deep to stop. It reminds you of the stories told by those who survived cholera outbreaks back east. Diseases brought by the movement of people, the dirt on the boots, the contaminated wells. You learn to watch for the first signs, the sudden weakness, the breathing that sounds like wheezing from a hollow pipe. One morning the guide wakes you with a soft shake. His face is pale, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. You realise he's been fighting it too. The wagon train slows, the pace dropping from exhaustion and fear. You stop at a creek, hoping the water will wash the sickness away or soothe the burning mouths. Instead, it seems to feed it, a thin river flowing from the mountains but still carrying death. The nights grow colder despite the day's heat. The fires you build no longer chase away the dread. The camp becomes quieter, voices reduced to whispers. People huddle, clutching their blankets, eyes drifting shut for hours longer than before. You find yourself sitting by the fire watching shadows dance. The stars blink overhead like cold eyes, distant and uncaring. You wonder how many others have died out here, swallowed by fever and dust. How many bones lie beneath this cracked earth, unmarked and forgotten. Somewhere in the middle of the night you hear a child crying. Not loud, just a soft, broken sound. It comes from a tent near the edge of the camp, where the woman with the baby tries to hold on to hope. You don't know if the baby lives. No one does. By the 5th day, the sickness has taken half the wagon train. You don't count the dead anymore. You only watch the living grow weaker. There are no doctors here, no hospitals, only the long, hard journey through fever, and the hope that those who survive will find stronger land beyond the next ridge. And still, the trail presses on. The American frontier does not pause. It does not wait. It is a relentless road, unforgiving, indifferent, and as dangerous as the wild beasts and bullets it hides beneath its dust. As the fever rages quietly among your group, an invisible divide forms, a thin line drawn between the healthy and the sick, between those still fighting and those already giving in. You begin to notice it in the way people look at one another, in the way conversations trail off before they begin. It's a line you cross again and again, both hesitant and inevitable, as survival pushes you closer to strangers and distances you from yourself. In this fragile camp, trust becomes the rarest commodity. Men who once shared meals now clutch their water skins tightly, eyes darting at the slightest movement. Women whisper in corners, keeping secrets behind tired smiles. Children, once curious and noisy, sit quietly, watching the faces around them with wide, uncertain eyes. You find yourself measuring every interaction. A nod here, a glance there. Offering a piece of hard tack or a sip of water feels like a gamble, a decision weighted with unspoken consequences. You see it in the way the guide's eyes linger on every visitor, how the men sharpen their knives not just out of habit but in preparation. It's not just the sickness you fear, it's what sickness brings out in people. One afternoon, a stranger arrives at your camp. He's gaunt, sunburned, with a hat pulled low over his eyes. He carries nothing but a rifle slung over his shoulder and a small bag tied tight at his waist. He speaks little, his voice rough and cautious. The guide watches him carefully but says nothing. The stranger asks for food, water and rest. The group debates in hushed tones. Some argue for kindness. After all, this land is unforgiving enough without turning strangers away. Others fear the risk, disease, theft, violence. The tension thickens, as palpable as the dust in the air. In the end, the guide steps forward and offers the man a place by the fire, but only on one condition. He pulls his weight. The stranger agrees, and slowly, over days, he earns his keep, repairing broken wagon wheels, helping tend to the weak, sharing stories of lands farther west. Despite the relief his presence brings, the unease doesn't fully lift. You sense the undercurrent of desperation that tightens around all of you like a noose. The frontier has taught you that survival isn't just about fighting the land. It's about navigating the fragile human bonds that can snap under pressure. As night falls and the fire crackles, the guide shares a quiet story. He tells you that out here, law isn't written in books or upheld by courts. It lives in these moments, in the choices people make when no one's watching, in the trust they dare to give or withhold. He says that sometimes the real danger isn't bullets or beasts, but the silence that grows between men. You listen, feeling the weight of his words settle deep inside. The American frontier is not just wild because of the landscape, but because of the fragile, fleeting humanity clinging to it. And as the fire's glow flickers, you understand that the line between survival and ruin is as thin and shifting as the dust beneath your boots. The days wear on, and the unease you felt begins to twist into something darker. The sparse community around your wagons grows restless, tension thickening the air as surely as the dust. Small disagreements flare like sparks in dry grass, and you sense the fragile peace could shatter at any moment. One evening, voices rise from the edge of camp, sharp, angry words spoken in a language you barely understand but know well enough to fear. Two men argue over water, their hands twitching toward weapons before the words even finish. Others rush in, some trying to calm, others watching with grim anticipation. The guide steps between them, his presence a silent warning, but the crackle of hostility remains. You realize this is no ordinary quarrel. This land carries old wounds beneath its surface, scars left by settlers, native tribes, and men who claim ownership through violence. The conflicts aren't always clear-cut, but they are constant, a patchwork of grudges, survival needs, and pride. That night, under a sky mottled with clouds, you hear gunshots far off, echoing like distant thunder. The guide tells as the days slip past, you begin to notice the subtle signs of a harsher reality beneath the surface of the rugged frontier life, the grinding poverty that shapes every choice, every desperate action. The clothes people wear are threadbare, patched repeatedly with scraps of fabric scavenged from forgotten sacks or discarded uniforms. Boots have worn thin soles, sometimes nothing at all to shield feet from the rough, unforgiving earth. You watch a woman mend a child's jacket by the flickering firelight. Her hands move quickly, but the fabric is so fragile it threatens to tear again with the slightest pull. The child sits close, eyes wide but tired, cheeks sunken from missed meals. There is a quiet resilience here, but also a deep exhaustion, the kind that settles into bones over months, years, without relief. Food is scarce, and the taste of it is bitter in your mouth. What little you carry is rationed carefully. Even then, hunger gnaws persistently, a dull ache that never fully fades. You've heard of families splitting apart because they couldn't feed everyone. You've heard of children sent away to live with strangers who could offer better care. Here, poverty is more than lack of money. It is a constant fight against fading hope. The guide tells you that many who travel this trail are not hopeful pioneers, but refugees of broken dreams, escapees from failed farms, mines that dried up, or towns that vanished under the weight of debt and despair. The frontier promises a fresh start, but for many, it is a harsh reminder of how thin the line is between survival and ruin. In the evenings, you see men and women sitting silently around fires, staring into the flames with haunted eyes. They speak little, not because they lack stories, but because the stories are too heavy to carry aloud. Instead, they share quiet glances and the occasional sigh, each weighed down by the memory of what they left behind. Empty pockets, lost homes, shattered families. You begin to understand that poverty on the frontier is not a temporary state, but a shadow that follows every step. It shapes the way people move, who they trust, and the risks they're willing to take. It twists kindness into calculation and forces even the strongest to bend. And yet, despite it all, life persists. Small acts of generosity flicker like fragile sparks. A piece of bread shared, a hand extended, a moment's comfort. They are rare but real, reminders that even in the harshest places the human spirit clings stubbornly to hope. You wonder how many more will make it through this chapter of the journey, carrying the weight of poverty like an invisible burden. You wonder how much longer the land can hold so many broken souls, but the trail goes on, and so do you. The camp has settled into a tense rhythm, the kind that emerges when people share space but not trust. Around you, the wagons form a rough circle, enclosing the weary souls who have found temporary refuge here. Yet, despite proximity, there is an unspoken distance, an invisible barrier that keeps hearts guarded and words measured. You notice the neighbours, other families and lone travellers, each absorbed in their own struggles, eyes flickering with fatigue and caution. They nod in passing, but avoid lingering conversations. The nights grow colder, and blankets are pulled tight, but there's no warmth shared beyond the crackling fires. In the flicker of firelight, faces appear sharper, shadows longer. You see hands twitching near belts, fingers resting lightly on worn revolvers. The silence between people feels thick, like a held breath, fragile and waiting. Sometimes you catch fragments of whispered conversations, muted tales of lost loved ones, stolen goods, bitter debts. The stories weave through the camp like ghosts, never fully spoken aloud but always present. You realise that out here, survival often means isolation. Trust is a fragile currency, and everyone guards what little they have fiercely. The harshness of the land teaches that leaning on others can be as dangerous as facing the wilderness alone. Despite the silence, you sense a shared understanding threading through the camp. A recognition of common hardship, a silent acknowledgement that each person carries scars both seen and unseen. Yet, none dare to bridge the divide openly, for fear that vulnerability might invite loss or betrayal. As night deepens and the stars scatter cold light overhead, you feel the weight of this quiet loneliness pressing in, a reminder that the frontier is not only wild and dangerous because of what roams in the dark, but also because of the invisible walls built between people trying to survive. The trail ahead promises more of this solitude, the harsh, unyielding loneliness of a land where every step forward means carrying both hope and suspicion in equal measure. Beyond the fragile human tensions and weary faces, the land itself exerts a quiet but relentless pressure, shaping every moment of your journey. The vastness of the frontier stretches endlessly, a canvas of sun-scorched plains, jagged cliffs, and sparse vegetation that seems to hold its breath under the burning sky. The wind carries whispers of forgotten storms and old dangers, rustling dry grasses that crackle beneath your boots. You notice how the sun's glare blurs the horizon, making distances deceptive and the path uncertain. Water is precious beyond measure, a scarce and shifting resource that determines the fate of men, animals and crops alike. Wells are dug with trembling hope, their depths often yielding only mud or bitter-tasting liquid. You learn quickly that thirst here is a constant companion, a slow, gnawing ache that no amount of rest can fully ease. At night, the temperature drops sharply, The cold settles into your bones, cutting through blankets and worn clothing. You huddle close to the fire, listening to the sounds of the wilderness, the low howl of distant coyotes, the rustle of unseen creatures moving through the brush. The land offers no comfort, only survival by the smallest margins. Storms, when they come, sweep in without warning. Thunder rolls across the plains and lightning splits the darkened sky. Rain, when it falls, is both a blessing and a curse, nourishing the thirsty earth, but turning trails into treacherous mud, slowing progress and threatening to drown fragile camps. You watch as the guide checks the skies with a practiced eye, reading clouds as if they were open books. Decisions to push forward or hold camp hinge on these signs, for nature here is as unpredictable and unforgiving as the people who call it home. You reflect on the many who have tried to tame this land, only to find themselves humbled by its raw power. The soil is stubborn, the seasons harsh, and the horizon endless. A reminder that, no matter the dreams carried westward, the frontier answers with quiet indifference. Here, survival is never certain. It is a fragile balance between man and wilderness, a daily negotiation where the land always holds the final word. And as you prepare to move on, the weight of nature's harsh hand settles over you. A reminder that this journey is not just through a place, but through a relentless force that shapes every breath you take. As you break camp and begin the slow, dusty trek once again, your thoughts drift to the countless others who have travelled this way before you. Those who came with hopes like yours but vanished into the vastness of the frontier, leaving only faint traces behind. Here and there along the trail you notice remnants. A shattered wagon wheel half buried in dirt, a rusted horseshoe lying among dry sagebrush, a crumbling wooden post with faded letters too worn to read. These silent relics tell stories without voices, of dreams abandoned, of journeys cut short. You come across a small clearing where bones peek from the cracked earth, bleached white by the relentless sun. Nearby, a battered leather boot lies askew, its partner nowhere in sight. The guide explains that this was once a camp, perhaps of a family or a small group who didn't survive the harsh realities of the land. The exact cause, disease, starvation, violence, remains a mystery, swallowed by time. These ghostly reminders cling to the edges of your mind, a sobering counterpoint to the hope that drives you forward. You realise that the Wild West was not just a land of opportunity, but a graveyard of dreams, where the price of survival was often life itself. At night, when the wind whispers through the empty trees and the campfire flickers low, you feel their presence. Echoes of those who walked this path before, their stories mingling with the crackle of flames and the distant call of coyotes. They are the invisible markers on a trail marked by hardship and loss, and yet the frontier does not mourn. It moves forward, indifferent and eternal. The ghosts linger only in the quiet moments, reminding you that every step you take is part of a long chain of human struggle against a land that is as beautiful as it is unforgiving. You tuck these thoughts away as you ready your wagon. The journey presses on, and with every mile you carry both the weight of those who came before and the fragile hope that you will be among the few who make it through. The endless trail stretches before you once more, a dusty ribbon cutting through the wild expanse, and with each mile a quiet solitude settles deeper into your bones. The constant company of others around the campfire cannot chase away this particular loneliness, the kind that clings tightly, born not of being alone but of being surrounded by strangers who carry their own fears and pains behind hardened eyes. In the stillness between dawn and dusk you walk beside the wagon, the wooden wheels creaking under the weight of supplies and hopes alike. The silence feels thick, interrupted only by the soft crunch of your footsteps against gravel and the occasional call of a distant bird. Conversations have become fewer, voices quieter, as people withdraw into themselves, conserving energy not just for the body, but for the mind. You think of home, of familiar faces and places now hundreds of miles behind you. The memories feel like another lifetime, a distant dream obscured by the vast, relentless landscape. The wilderness offers no comfort, no familiar landmarks, only an unbroken horizon that seems to stretch forever. Evenings bring their own kind of loneliness. Around the fire, faces are drawn and tired, shadows flickering like fragile ghosts. Some retreat into whispered prayers, others sit silently, staring into flames as if searching for answers in the dancing light. You share glances but seldom words, each lost in their own quiet battles. You understand now that the frontier tests more than just strength or skill. It tests the heart's endurance against isolation, fear, and the unknown. Trust is scarce, and connections fragile. Everyone carries invisible scars that few dare to reveal. This loneliness is a companion as real as any person, and it walks beside you, a reminder that survival here demands not just physical grit, but a resilience of spirit often unspoken. Yet, despite it all, the journey continues. You press forward through the emptiness and silence, carrying with you the faint hope that beyond this lonely stretch, the land may soften, and with it, the weight on your soul. As your journey pushes deeper into the frontier, the landscape subtly changes, and with it, the stories of those who inhabit this vast land begin to emerge more clearly. You hear the distant sound of drums one evening, carried faintly on the dry wind, and the guide pauses, his face hardening with a mixture of caution and respect. You know this land has been home to indigenous peoples for generations, tribes whose knowledge of the terrain, seasons, and survival surpasses that of the newcomers. Yet, the arrival of settlers like you has brought tension and conflict, misunderstandings, and often violence. The guide tells stories in hushed tones around the campfire, recounting encounters both hostile and tentative. Some tribes see the wagons as threats, harbingers of loss and displacement, while others cautiously trade or share knowledge, navigating a fragile coexistence. One morning you spot figures on horseback watching from a distance, their movements deliberate and silent. The guide signals the group to remain calm, emphasizing the importance of respect and restraint. The tension is palpable, a fragile thread stretched thin between curiosity and fear. You learn that these encounters are as much about survival as yours, the indigenous peoples defending their homes and ways of life against a tide that threatens to wash them away. Their knowledge of the land is deep, their strategies born from centuries of living in harmony with harsh environments. As the sun dips low, the figures retreat, leaving behind a quiet reminder that this land belongs to many stories, not just those of the settlers. The frontier is a place of collision and connection, where histories intertwine with uneasy grace. You carry this awareness with you, understanding that your journey is not just through the wilderness, but through a landscape layered with human histories, complex, painful, and resilient. The trail winds onward, and with every step you tread lightly on ground that has witnessed centuries of struggle and survival. As your wagon rattles along the rough trail, an invisible enemy lingers in the air, the ever-present threat of disease. Unlike the obvious dangers of rattlesnakes or gunfights, illness moves silently, striking without warning and sparing no one regardless of strength or will. You notice how coughs begin to echo faintly among the camp, a soft rasping that grows steadily worse. The guide explains that illnesses like cholera, smallpox and typhoid have swept through these lands before, often brought by travellers and spread in cramped camps, where clean water is scarce and sanitation nearly impossible. One by one, faces grow pale, eyes hollow. The sick retreat from the fire seeking shade or solitude, their bodies weakened by fever and exhaustion. You watch helplessly as a child curls into her mother's lap, too weak to cry, skin burning with fever. The sight etches itself deeply into your memory. Medical help is a distant dream here. Doctors are rare, and medicines often ineffective or unavailable. Folk remedies and prayers become the only defences against invisible invaders. The guide tells you that survival often hinges on luck, a cruel game where many lose. You reflect on how disease shapes the frontier as much as the wild landscape, invisible yet devastating, capable of wiping out entire families and communities. It is a constant shadow, adding weight to every step and choice. Even as you push onward, the threat lingers. The dust, the water, the shared campfires, all potential carriers of unseen danger. And so, the journey becomes not only a test of endurance, but a fragile dance with illness, where each breath is precious and every moment uncertain. As you continue your slow progress westward, the raw realities of frontier life etch themselves more deeply into your senses. The endless dust, the dry heat that saps strength, the ceaseless vigilance against dangers both visible and unseen. Yet amid this harshness, you begin to understand something crucial. Despite the pervasive loneliness, despite the ever-present threats, there is an undeniable need for community, for fragile bonds forged under the strain of survival. The wagons, arranged in their tentative circle, form more than just a practical barrier against wandering predators or hostile eyes. They represent a fragile sanctuary, a small bastion of humanity in a vast wilderness that neither understands nor forgives weakness. Around the fire each evening, voices grow more frequent, stories shared in low tones. You see men and women lending hands to each other, repairing wagon wheels, tending to the sick, dividing scarce provisions with a cautious generosity. Yet these bonds are delicate, strained under the weight of suspicion and desperation. You watch as a quarrel almost erupts over a missing blanket, something small, yet with outsized importance when every possession counts. The guide intervenes with calm authority, reminding everyone that cooperation is not a choice but a necessity. Without it, none will survive. You come to see that community here is not born of comfort or friendship, but of sheer pragmatism. The line between ally and enemy is thin, and trust is measured not in years but in small acts. Sharing a last scrap of food, watching a friend's back during a night watch, or offering a place to rest. Yet even these acts carry risks. The fear that generosity might be repaid with theft, or that weakness might invite exploitation. The children in the camp offer a different kind of hope. Their laughter, though scarce, is a fragile thread holding the adults to something beyond mere survival. They remind you of the lives that might be lived if the land ever softens, if peace ever comes. Their innocence contrasts starkly with the hardened faces of their parents and guardians, who wear exhaustion like armour. As days turn into weeks, you observe rituals that quietly bind this community together. Shared meals, evening prayers, whispered stories of home and dreams yet unrealised. These moments feel like brief reprieves from the relentless hardships, fragile islands of humanity in an ocean of uncertainty. But the frontier is never kind to vulnerability. Tensions flare when resources run low or fears rise. You notice how alliances shift subtly, how some withdraw into silence while others assert dominance, staking claims not just on land but on the fragile trust that holds the group together. The guide tells you that this balance is the true test of frontier life. The land will challenge your strength, the wild will threaten your safety, but it is the complicated, often painful ties between people that will determine who endures. And so, as you prepare for the days ahead, you carry with you this understanding. Survival is not a solitary act, but a collective struggle. A delicate weaving of human connection in a world that offers no guarantees. The frontier's danger lies not only in its untamed wilderness, but in the fragile communities that must hold fast to hope while standing on the edge of despair. As you press further into the vast, untamed expanse of the American frontier, time seems to lose its familiar shape. Days blend into nights, marked not by the ticking of clocks but by the rising and setting of the sun, the shifting of shadows, and the slow, unyielding movement of the wagon wheels grinding over endless trails of dirt and stone. In this endless march forward, you become acutely aware of how fleeting each moment is, how fragile life can be under the unrelenting sky. The landscape around you tells stories older than any settler's claim. Towering mesas and jagged cliffs stand like silent witnesses, their weathered faces etched with the slow passage of centuries. The wind carries scents of sage and earth, mingled with distant hints of pine and smoke from other camps far off, where others make their own struggles against the wild. Time here is measured not in hours or days, but in survival. Every sunrise brings new challenges: the search for clean water, the battle against blistering heat or biting cold, the constant watch for threats that come on 4 legs or 2. The horizon seems endless, stretching like an ocean of dust and rock, where each step forward feels both triumphant and insignificant. You reflect on how the very idea of progress here is complicated. The promise of opportunity that drew so many westward often clashes with the harsh realities etched into every inch of this land. Railroads push forward, bringing glimpses of civilization, distant towns, mail carriers, merchants, but these are small islands surrounded by vast, indifferent wilderness. Change comes slowly, and not always for the better. The landscape itself shifts as settlements grow, forests are cut, and rivers diverted. The balance between man and nature teeters on a knife's edge, as new fences divide old hunting grounds, and the rhythms of wildlife alter in response. With every claim staked and every homestead built, the frontier's wildness retreats, but its dangers remain. You watch as the people around you adapt, some with hope, others with bitter resignation. There are those who see the arrival of new towns and railroads as signs of salvation, a path out of poverty and uncertainty. Others fear that the frontier they know, harsh and unforgiving as it is, will disappear, replaced by lawlessness of a different kind. Greed, exploitation, and the endless hunger for land and wealth. In the quiet moments, you ponder the paradox of this place. A land both cruel and beautiful, a place of endings and beginnings intertwined. The frontier is not just a physical journey, but a passage through a shifting landscape of dreams, loss, and resilience. As your wagon creaks forward beneath a sky streaked with the soft colours of dusk, you feel the weight of time pressing gently but persistently on your shoulders. The journey continues, carrying you through a world in flux, where survival means adapting not only to the land, but to the unceasing march of change itself. As the trail unwinds before you like a ribbon of dust and hardship, you begin to notice something unsettling: the thin, often fragile presence of law and order in this vast wilderness. The frontier is not just a place of wild landscapes and untamed animals, it is also a patchwork of communities struggling to impose rules on a land that seems inherently resistant to them. You overhear conversations at camp about sheriffs, marshals and judges, men whose authority is often as tenuous as the supply of fresh water. In many towns, law enforcement is stretched thin, or sometimes absent altogether. The result is a delicate balance, a dance on the edge of chaos where violence can erupt without warning, and justice is often swift, unforgiving, and at times arbitrary. As night falls, you see men gathered around a fire, voices low as they recount tales of disputes settled not in courtrooms, but at the barrel of a gun. Stories ripple through the camp, of gamblers who cheated too often, of cattle rustlers caught and hanged without trial, of rival gangs staking violent claims on small towns. The line between outlaw and lawman blurs, as sometimes the same man wears both badges, depending on who holds power at the moment. You sense the ever-present tension underlying daily life. Every handshake could be a prelude to betrayal. Every glance may conceal a threat. The absence of a firm, reliable justice system means that survival often depends on personal strength, reputation, and the willingness to resort to violence. This reality shapes behaviour. Distrust grows like wildfire, and grudges can linger for years, fueling feuds that leave scars deeper than any wound. Yet despite the volatility, there is a yearning for stability. Townsfolk gather to establish makeshift courts or community watches. They draft rules, hold meetings in dusty halls, and try to build order from chaos. These efforts are fragile but vital, small flames fighting the encroaching darkness. You realise that the Wild West's danger is not only from nature or bandits, but from the unpredictable and uneven grip of law. The frontier is a place where justice is as wild as the land itself, sometimes present, often absent, and always precarious. As you prepare to move on, you carry with you the heavy knowledge that out here, safety is fleeting and must be earned daily. The landscape is vast, but the law is a whisper carried on the wind, fragile, uncertain, and essential to those who dare to call this wild place home. The trail continues, and as you trudge forward beneath the relentless sun, the veneer of the romanticised Wild West begins to peel away, revealing the stark, unforgiving reality beneath. The stories you've heard in town, quick fortunes made, daring gunfights, and boundless freedom, seem like distant echoes compared to the daily grind you witness here. A grinding poverty that is invisible in the silver screen myths but omnipresent on the frontier. You watch as families settle in small clearings or near shallow streams, their makeshift homes cobbled together from scraps of wood, canvas, and hope. The cabins are often little more than lean-tos, barely shielding their occupants from the bitter cold of night or the fierce summer sun. You notice the threadbare clothing patched repeatedly, and the worn shoes that barely hold together under the weight of endless miles. Food is scarce and monotonous. Cornmeal, beans, dried meat, and whatever wild game can be caught form the staple diet. There are no markets brimming with fresh produce, no steady supply of goods. Hunting and foraging become essential skills, but even these offer no guarantees. Droughts, harsh winters, and failing crops leave many families teetering on the brink of starvation. You hear whispered stories around the fire about families forced to abandon homesteads after a single failed harvest or a sudden illness. The promise of land ownership and prosperity feels like a cruel joke when the earth is so unyielding and the seasons so harsh. Poverty here is not just a lack of money, it is a pervasive, gnawing hunger that seeps into bones and spirits alike. Children go barefoot, faces streaked with dust and dirt, their laughter sometimes scarce under the weight of adult worries. Illness often follows poverty closely, as weak bodies struggle to fight off infections with little rest or nourishment. You realise that the freedom so often romanticised is tightly bound to the chains of hardship. The settlers are not reckless adventurers, but desperate people clinging to the slimmest chance for a better life. Every day is a battle to keep what little they have, their land, their possessions, their very lives. Yet amid this struggle, you witness moments of quiet resilience. Neighbours share what little they can, old women mend clothes by the firelight, and children play with makeshift toys fashioned from scraps. There is a fierce determination that pulses beneath the hardship, a refusal to give up, even when the odds seem insurmountable. As you sit beside the flickering flames one evening, the weight of this reality settles deeply. The Wild West is not the land of easy riches or heroic tales. It is a place of grinding poverty, relentless toil, and fragile hopes. And it is these harsh truths, woven into every step you take, that define the real frontier. A landscape where survival is both an act of endurance and a quiet, stubborn rebellion against despair. As the wagon creaks forward and the endless dust swirls around you, your thoughts turn to the women who share this arduous journey. A presence often overlooked in the tales of the Wild West, but essential to the fragile communities trying to carve out a life here. The hardships they endure are not less severe. In many ways, they are compounded by the weight of expectation, isolation, and relentless labour. You watch a woman near the campfire, her hands steady as she prepares a sparse meal, her face etched with lines far deeper than her years. Her eyes carry a quiet strength and exhaustion intertwined, a reflection of a life spent managing not only the physical survival of her family, but the emotional burdens that come with it. You realise that on the frontier, women often bear responsibilities that go far beyond the domestic. There is no luxury of rest here. At dawn, women rise early to fetch water from distant streams, tending to livestock, mending clothes, and caring for children while the men set out to hunt or work the land. Their days are a continuous cycle of chores made heavier by the absence of the comforts and support systems they might have known back east. The isolation can be suffocating. Neighbours miles away, contact limited, and little chance for distraction or relief. You hear whispered stories of women who have lost husbands to illness or violence and suddenly find themselves the sole providers, forced to learn how to wield a rifle, work the fields, or navigate the perilous local politics. Their strength is quiet, often hidden beneath layers of resilience and sacrifice. The frontier's dangers are not only physical, the emotional toll is immense. Letters from distant family arrive rarely, if at all, and the uncertainty about the future gnaws at their spirits. You see how community gatherings, church services, and occasional visits from travelling merchants or ministers become lifelines. Moments when the women can share news, advice, and support, however fleeting. Yet, amid these struggles, women find ways to create pockets of comfort and normalcy. They fashion homes from the wilderness, plant gardens with precious seeds, and teach their children songs and stories that connect them to a world beyond the trail. They hold on to traditions, memories, and hopes that the land itself seems determined to erase. You reflect on how essential their role is, not just for immediate survival, but for the very possibility of civilization taking root in this wild place. Without their labour, their care, and their determination, the fragile communities would crumble. The frontier is often seen through the lens of gunslingers and pioneers, but the real story includes these silent struggles, the countless acts of endurance and courage that happen far from the spotlight. You carry this image with you, a woman standing at the edge of the wilderness, eyes fixed on a horizon that promises nothing yet demands everything, embodying the quiet backbone of the West's relentless push forward. As the days drag onward beneath the vast, indifferent sky, your attention is drawn to the children who travel with the wagons, small, fragile figures navigating a world far harsher than any childhood should demand. Their presence is a constant reminder of the stakes involved in this relentless westward push, and the unique dangers they face on the frontier are both physical and deeply emotional. You watch a young boy, no more than 8, trailing behind the wagon train, his legs thin and dust-covered, his face streaked with sweat and grime. He clutches a worn cloth doll, a fragile comfort amid the harshness. The sun beats down relentlessly, and the boy's small frame is vulnerable not only to the elements, but to the exhaustion that grips many children here, the kind born from days spent walking miles under unforgiving conditions. Illness spreads rapidly among the young, and you overhear grim tales whispered around the fire of children succumbing to fever or infections, their delicate bodies unable to withstand what adults endure with difficulty. The absence of proper nutrition, clean water and medical care makes the youngest the most vulnerable, their cries sometimes the only sound piercing the heavy silence of the camp at night. Beyond the physical dangers, the children face a loss of innocence few can imagine. Childhood here is truncated, replaced by responsibilities far beyond their years. They fetch water, gather firewood, and care for younger siblings while their parents tend to endless chores or stand guard. Play is scarce and precious, moments stolen between survival and duty. The emotional toll weighs heavily. You see how the constant movement, the fear, and the uncertainty shape their eyes, wide and watchful, often reflecting a quiet fear that lingers beneath a forced bravery. Many carry memories of lost homes, departed loved ones, or violence that no child should witness. Yet, despite all this, there is resilience. The children learn to adapt, to find moments of joy in small things, a rare berry, a shared story, a fleeting game under the fading light. Their laughter, though infrequent, rings out like a fragile promise that life persists even here. As the wagon train halts for the night, you glimpse a small group of children gathered around a fire, their faces illuminated by flickering flames, sharing whispered tales or songs from distant places. In that fragile circle, the harsh wilderness seems to soften just enough to cradle their fleeting hopes. The frontier is unforgiving, and the journey for its youngest travellers is perhaps the most perilous of all. Yet their presence carries a profound truth, that even in the hardest places life endures, and the future, uncertain and fraught, still lies ahead. As the wagon wheels crunch over the dusty trail, and the days stretch endlessly beneath the harsh sun, you begin to notice something less visible yet profoundly shaping the lives of those who brave the frontier: the silent weight of mental strain. Beyond the physical dangers, the gunfights, the diseases, the unforgiving wilderness, there exists a quiet battle waged within, one that gnaws at the spirit and frays the nerves. You watch a man sitting apart from the group as twilight settles, his gaze distant and hollow. His hands tremble slightly as he pokes at the dying embers of the campfire, the faces of his family etched faintly in the flickering light. He is a man worn thin, not just by the hardships of the trail, but by the ceaseless pressure of uncertainty, fear, and loss. The frontier offers no comfort for the mind. The relentless isolation, the ever-present dangers, and the crushing responsibility of survival weigh heavily. Nights are long and restless, filled with the sounds of the wild, but also with memories, of homes left behind, of loved ones lost, of violence witnessed and endured. Sleep, when it comes, is often shallow, haunted by dreams or nightmares. You overhear quiet conversations about homesickness, a word that barely captures the deep ache of displacement and loneliness. Many settlers find themselves caught between hope and despair, their mental resilience tested as harshly as their bodies. The frontier is not only a physical wilderness, but a psychological one, where despair can settle like a shadow that refuses to lift. Some turn to drink or reckless behaviour as a way to escape the grinding pressure. Others withdraw into silence, their eyes growing distant, their voices fading. You realise that beneath the visible scars of wounds and disease lie countless invisible wounds, the kind that shape decisions, relationships, and the will to continue. Yet, amid this struggle, moments of human connection offer brief reprieves. Shared stories around the fire, the touch of a hand, or the sound of a child's laughter can kindle a fragile spark of hope. Faith, too, becomes a refuge for many. Prayers whispered in the dark, small rituals that offer a sense of meaning amid chaos. You come to understand that survival on the frontier is as much about protecting the mind as it is about protecting the body. The unseen battles fought in quiet corners of the camp are no less vital than those fought with rifles or bare hands. And so, as the night deepens and the stars stretch wide overhead, you hold this knowledge close, that the true danger of the Wild West lies not only in its visible threats, but in the quiet erosion of the spirit, a slow, relentless pressure that shapes every soul daring enough to face its vast, unforgiving wilderness. As your wagon rolls onward through the sun-scorched plains and rugged hills, you cannot help but sense the lingering shadows of conflict and misunderstanding that haunt this land. The stories shared in hushed tones around the campfire reveal a deeper, more complicated reality. The fraught and often tragic interactions between settlers like yourself and the Native American tribes whose ancestors have called these lands home for centuries. You recall how, early in the journey, the guide spoke cautiously of encounters with various tribes, some peaceful, others marked by tension and violence. It becomes clear that the frontier is not a blank slate, but a contested landscape where cultures collide, each with their own claims, griefs and aspirations. The native peoples you learn about are not the faceless adversaries of dime novels or popular films, but complex societies with rich traditions, deep knowledge of the land, and a fierce commitment to protecting their way of life. Yet the relentless advance of settlers, the pressures of expanding railroads, and government policies have fractured their world, forcing difficult choices and painful losses. You imagine the lives of those who watch from the shadows, their villages disrupted, hunting grounds diminished and sacred places desecrated. The stories speak of raids and reprisals, but also of fragile truces and moments of shared humanity. Some settlers attempt diplomacy, trading goods and stories, while others respond with fear and suspicion, viewing the tribes through the lens of threat. This tangled history is marked by tragedy and resilience. Families on both sides endure loss of loved ones, homes, and futures. The land itself seems to echo these wounds, scarred by battles and the relentless push of change. You sense the profound loneliness in these encounters, the sense that everyone involved is caught in a current far greater than themselves, swept along by forces of expansion, survival, and cultural upheaval. As your wagon creaks forward beneath a sky heavy with clouds, you carry with you the weight of these stories, reminders that the Wild West was not just a frontier of adventure and opportunity, but a place of deep conflict, loss, and the ongoing struggle for identity and survival on both sides of the divide. The sun dips lower as your journey carries you deeper into the wilderness, and a chill begins to creep into the air, reminding you that the environment is as much an adversary as any outlaw or hostile encounter. Among the many dangers that claim lives on the frontier, disease remains one of the most merciless and indiscriminate. Unlike gunfights or natural disasters, sickness creeps silently and relentlessly, breaking bodies and spirits with little warning. You remember the stories told around campfires, hushed, fearful whispers about outbreaks of smallpox, cholera, typhoid, and scarlet fever that have devastated entire settlements. The frontier's sparse medical infrastructure offers little hope. Doctors are few, medicines scarce, and knowledge limited. In many cases, the closest help is days, even weeks away. In these dusty makeshift homes, a simple fever can spiral into a death sentence. Children, the elderly, and the already weakened are especially vulnerable. You imagine a mother watching helplessly as her child's strength fades, hands clutching at the coarse blankets that do little to comfort or protect. The desperation in these moments is palpable. Prayers whispered in the dim light, remedies passed down through generations, and the raw hope that nature might spare one more life. The frontier's harsh conditions only worsen these medical challenges. Dirty water, poor sanitation, malnutrition, and constant exposure to the elements create fertile ground for illness. Quarantines are rare and often ineffective, and superstition sometimes fills the void left by scientific understanding. You observe how the lack of proper care forces communities to rely heavily on folk remedies, herbal concoctions, and the knowledge of midwives and healers, women whose wisdom is both revered and questioned. Their hands perform miracles in some cases, and fail tragically in others, caught between tradition and the overwhelming scale of human suffering. The relentless presence of disease shapes the rhythms of life here. Funerals become frequent and sorrowful events, marked by a grim resignation rather than ceremony. Grief is a constant companion, woven into daily existence as families lose members, sometimes in clusters, leaving holes that can never fully heal. Yet, amid these shadows, you see flickers of hope and resilience. New settlements sometimes bring doctors and rudimentary hospitals, and the slow spread of knowledge begins to chip away at the terror of illness. Communities band together to support the sick, sharing resources and care in an effort to save what they can. As night settles and the stars begin their slow, steady watch, You feel the weight of these unseen battles, the countless lives quietly lost, the suffering borne in silence, and the fragile victories that make survival on the frontier possible at all. The Wild West danger is not only in the open gunfights or brutal landscapes, but in the invisible enemy that lurks within every home, every camp, and every weary traveller's body. As dawn breaks, casting a pale light over the rugged terrain, your thoughts turn to the economic life that pulses quietly beneath the surface of the Wild West. The popular image of quick riches, gold strikes and silver booms, is only one piece of a far more complex and fragile system that sustained the countless settlers, traders, and labourers who made this harsh land their home. You notice the bustling activity in a nearby trading post, a modest wooden structure surrounded by wagons and horses, where goods are exchanged in a fragile dance of supply and demand. The economy here is precarious, a delicate balance held together by the sweat of miners, the skill of ranchers, and the persistence of merchants who risk everything bringing supplies across dangerous trails. Money is scarce, and credit often king. Bartering remains common. A sack of flour might be traded for a dozen eggs, a handful of tools exchanged for a night's lodging. Prices fluctuate wildly based on weather, bandit activity, and the arrival or departure of the railroad. You hear about miners who strike it rich only to lose it all in a few months, and about families barely scraping by on the profits of cattle drives or harvests that sometimes fail. Labour is backbreaking and constant. Ranch hands drive herds across thousands of miles, enduring storms, stampedes, and thieves. Miners spend hours underground, breathing dust and damp air, hoping the next strike will be their salvation. Women run boarding houses, cook meals, and mend clothes, forming the backbone of this fragile economy. You become aware that the economy is deeply interconnected with the harshness of life here. A poor harvest can ripple through a community, causing shortages, rising prices, and mounting debts. Banditry and theft threaten the delicate networks of trade, adding another layer of risk to survival. Despite these hardships, the frontier economy is marked by a rugged ingenuity. Settlers innovate, crafting tools from scrap, developing new methods of farming, and establishing makeshift schools and banks. They rely on community cooperation and mutual aid, understanding that their individual fates are bound together. As your wagon creaks forward, the realization settles on you that the Wild West economy is less a story of easy wealth than of constant struggle, resilience, and adaptation. It is a story of people trying to carve stability from chaos, to create a future from the uncertain soil beneath their feet, and to hold fast to hope amid relentless uncertainty. As the day wanes and shadows lengthen across the barren landscape, your thoughts turn to the communities forming amid this wild expanse, fragile as they are, yet pulsating with an unexpected heartbeat of faith and fellowship. In this harsh world where danger seems constant, religion and community become pillars, anchors in a sea of uncertainty, providing comfort, structure, and sometimes even hope. You observe a small cluster of settlers gathered beneath a hastily constructed wooden church, its walls rough-hewn, and windows simple panes of glass or cloth. The sound of a hymnal rises softly, voices trembling but earnest, cutting through the quiet evening air. This gathering is more than a ritual. It is a lifeline, a momentary respite where fears and hardships are shared and momentarily softened. Religion on the frontier is not merely a matter of dogma, but of survival. The settlers carry their beliefs from distant homesteads, often blending traditions into new forms shaped by necessity. Pastors and circuit riders travel great distances to tend to scattered flocks, bringing sermons that weave together faith, morality, and the pragmatic advice needed to endure. You notice how these gatherings foster a sense of community. Neighbours come together not only to worship but to exchange news, share food, and provide mutual aid. In a land where official law is fragile and often absent, moral codes enforced by faith sometimes serve as an informal social glue, binding people in common purpose and trust. Yet, these moments of unity do not erase the underlying tensions and conflicts that simmer beneath the surface. Differences in background, ethnicity, and belief sometimes spark disagreements, and the harsh realities of survival can strain even the closest bonds. Still, the desire for belonging and meaning drives people to gather, to support one another in a world that often feels isolating. You realise that religion and community here are intertwined lifelines, fragile but vital threads in the tapestry of frontier life. They provide more than solace. They create a framework through which settlers interpret their struggles and find the strength to face another day in the relentless wilderness. As twilight deepens, you carry with you this understanding of the quiet power of faith and fellowship, the unseen forces that, like the stars overhead, guide weary travellers through the long, dark nights of the American frontier. As your journey winds to its close and the final embers of the campfire glow softly in the cool night air, you take a moment to reflect on everything you've witnessed and learned throughout this vast, rugged land. The stories, the struggles, the silent moments of endurance. These are the threads that weave the true fabric of the Wild West, far beyond the myths and legends passed down by popular tales. This frontier is not a playground of gunfights and easy riches, but a harsh, demanding environment where survival often meant grappling with poverty, disease, isolation, and conflict on multiple fronts. You've seen how settlers endured relentless physical hardship, how women bore immense burdens with quiet strength, how children faced dangers no child should know, and how mental strain shadowed every weary step. You've come to understand the delicate, often painful interactions between settlers and native peoples, the invisible wars waged by illness, and the fragile economy that held these scattered communities together. You've heard the murmurs of faith and community, fragile yet vital, that sustained hope when all else seemed bleak. The West was a place of contradictions, wild yet home to determined families, lawless yet bound by codes of honour and necessity, a land of freedom that demanded unyielding sacrifice. You realise that the spirit of the West was less about heroism and more about endurance, an endless, quiet determination to carve out a life despite overwhelming odds. As you look up at the star-studded sky, stretching endlessly over the plains and mountains, you feel a profound respect for those who lived, loved, struggled, and survived here. Their stories are not just history but a testament to human resilience in the face of relentless challenge. And so, this journey through the true American frontier closes not with a flourish, but with the gentle, steady beat of lives lived in perseverance, a reminder that behind every legend lies a far deeper and more complex truth, waiting quietly beneath the dust and silence of the Wild West. Now that you've travelled alongside these weary souls through the vast and rugged landscape of the Wild West, it's time to settle deeper into your own space, a safe and peaceful place far from the dust and danger you've imagined tonight. Let yourself slowly relax, releasing the weight of the day and the distant echoes of hardship you've heard. There is comfort in knowing that these stories, though filled with struggle, are reminders of resilience and the enduring human spirit. Imagine yourself wrapped in a soft, warm blanket, the kind that soothes tired muscles and quiets a restless mind. You're tucked away from the wind, the cold, and the endless horizon, safe inside a small cabin or your own cosy room. The sounds of the frontier, the crackling fire, the distant howl of coyotes, the whisper of wind over the prairie, fade gently into the background, replaced by the calm rhythm of your breathing. Let your thoughts slow. The images of dusty trails, flickering campfires, and worn faces give way to a quiet stillness. You're no longer a traveller on a dangerous frontier, but someone resting after a long day, carried by the steady beat of a peaceful night. Your muscles soften, your heart slows. Each breath in fills you with calm, and each breath out releases any tension or worry. The Wild West was a place of endless challenge, but now you have left its harshness behind. You're surrounded by safety, by warmth, by quiet. As you rest, you can carry with you the strength of those who came before, their courage, their endurance, their hope, knowing that, like them, you too can face whatever comes with steady calm and quiet strength. Allow your eyelids to grow heavy. Feel the softness of your pillow beneath your head. Let the darkness welcome you without fear, a gentle veil inviting peaceful dreams. Tonight, you can rest fully, deeply, knowing the frontier's wildness exists only in stories now, while you sleep safely, cradled by night's gentle embrace. So breathe deeply one more time, let go completely. Tomorrow is a new day, full of its own quiet possibilities, but for now, you rest, and in this rest, you find peace. Good night, and sleep well.